Well, welcome to the Transformational podcast. You've got myself, Robert, the Marine from Maryland. You got Chris, the pastor from Paradise.
Yo.
We welcome you back. We thank you that you're listening, following with us, and learning to let faith transform the way you live. That is obviously why we do this. We do it not just because, not just because we're just looking for something to do on a Saturday or just trying to catch up. Do it because we feel like this is what God called us to do, and we're being obedient to that calling. But more importantly, we're doing it to help yourself and even ourselves, frankly, grow in a stronger, closer relationship with God in our daily walk. That being said, Chris, we're going to be jumping into Hebrews, talking about Samson today. That'll be fun. I can't wait. But before we do that, what do you have? What's let you go first? What's going on in your world this week? Maybe even today.
I've had a really cool week. Really crazy week, but good.
Yeah.
All in all, last weekend ended up having to. We were supposed to leave for spring break on Sunday, but on Saturday something was going on with my wife. Physically, she was in a lot of pain. Ended up taking her to the hospital that morning, and we were there for a long time. And they ran tests and things like that. And literally everything checked out, and the doctor was like, "I believe that you don't feel well. I really believe you."
Yeah.
He was like, "But these tests are checking out well and like they should." Anyway, we prayed through it and all, and I think there was spiritual warfare involved, and it is what it is. And God, we prayed through that, and really feel like God just began to create the breakthrough she needed, and physically started feeling better. So we ended up leaving a little bit later than we anticipated that last Sunday. So I got to go and just to service and be there. And it was great. It was so great. Just, I love our church. I love listening to other people use the giftings God has given them and seeing the Holy Spirit move. And so it was a great Sunday. But also there's a guy who blessed me greatly with a new pair of boots last Sunday.
Really?
Yeah, dude, they're so sweet, dude. I'm gonna be wearing them this Sunday.
So, what are they? What are we talking, like work boots, fancy boots?
No, they're fancy. They're black felt boots, fancy, dude. I'm
right.
telling you, I'm gonna be new boot goofing tomorrow. All right, so I'm just saying, man.
Scuff the bottom of them. You're gonna slip around.
Man, they're so nice. So I'll be wearing those tomorrow. But so that was end up leaving that afternoon for Broken Bow. Went up there with some friends of ours, and got to enjoy some time up there. Went on some hikes, and man, we had a little bit of rain part of the time, but man, some beautiful weather the rest of the time. And so just got to enjoy some time with some other they're basically like, they're friends, but they're like family. So love getting to spend that time up there. And then man, I've got a wedding tonight, and actually it's one of our listeners,
okay,
one of our friends.
Who's getting hitched?
It's Jack. So congratulations, right. Jack. I'm sure
congratulations, Jack.
You may miss this episode. I don't know. You'll be on the honeymoon next week. And so
and hopefully Chris doesn't mess it up. Don't mess it up, Chris.
All right? I'm not doing it. I'm just in the Tinder. No, because he's marrying Parker, who is Rocky's daughter. So Rocky, my executive pastor.
He got it.
Rocky's going to cry. Sense. He's going to cry through that one. So,
I was going to say, you do realize Rocky won't get through that, right?
No,
Rocky's just going to be boohooing the whole time. No,
it'll be great, though.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
So Rocky always does a great job with it. But it's been a fun week, man. It's just good times.
That's awesome.
What about you, man?
Well, first of all, you mentioned boots, and I just think this is interesting. Lord was good to me. I want to say it was last weekend. May have been after we podcasted or maybe the next day. Anyway, I was turning over some stuff with a pitchfork in our garden. And it's an above ground raised bed garden. And so I was just digging in this basically a raised bed type thing. And I went to stab into the raised bed, and it went through a crack. I'm not kidding. And these cracks are, the boards are stacked right on top of each other, but it went through the crack in the two boards, and it went right into my boot. And I wear steel toe boots, Chris. It literally nicked the steel toe as it went into my boot, and it went across my toes.
God, dude.
But but God was good because, and I don't even know how, it missed everything.
Wow.
In all my toes. And I'm not talking like a small, tiny little bit of fork. It went all the way in. I couldn't get it out. I had to take my foot out of the boot to like get it unstuck because that's where it was. And so yeah, God was good with me on that one. I've had really good success with these steel toe boots, never having a problem.
I bet
But
you swing the pitchfork a little differently from then on, huh?
well, I definitely didn't swing it at myself anymore. And who knew that Joker would go through that boot the way it did? It didn't
That's
even.
pretty crazy, dude.
I mean, think about it. It went through 2 pieces of wood and then through the boot. It was impressive. So now, good
it's just
week.
too strong, Robert. It's all the
yeah. It's it's
the dad strength over there.
That's right. Yeah. There ain't any muscles here. It is all dad strength.
Whatever.
Just grit. Yeah. So the weekend in and of itself was good. Weird, frustrating Wednesday that went from morning to like super late. But when I went into Thursday, it was coming out of Wednesday, which was frustrated, and I was like, Lord, I need you to go. I need you to go before me today. Like, I really need you to go before me. I need you to give me favor, grace, etc. Anyway, finish out Thursday, and I was like, I think we actually like may have won a little bit today, and which was completely opposite on the previous day. And the Lord gets the glory on that because it is there's no way otherwise that it would have been successful Thursday, especially based on even Wednesday. So that was good. Kind of learned to rest and trust in Him. We had Krista here this week, our oldest, and she's off back to college. She had spring break, and now she is headed back to finish out her school year. That girl cracks me up. She is driven to complete college. She's driven to go get a job. And so if and when she finishes, you want a hard driven, focused employee. I know somebody that's probably willing to put in the work. That's definitely just her nature. But yeah. What else? That's about it. We like I said, I just got done doing more yard work today. Not the pitchfork type yard work, but the moving mulch. I think I must have moved like 5 yards of mulch or something crazy. But my back is not what it used to be, but it's hanging in there, so that's good. That's good. Yeah, but it's just finally warming up. It's freezing this week, and now we're making it. So with Samson, man, it's like 4 chapters.
Which, by the way, we're picking up in Samson from Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith.
No, that's point.
Just want to back it up a little bit. We've been looking at the Hall of Faith, and really, it really reflects the heart of our podcast. That's why we've gone through these one by one. Is we talk about transformational faith. These are people who are known not because they were perfect, but because they were people of faith, people who God used them for a purpose as He trusted God. And actually, when we say they weren't perfect, we're actually looking at one today who absolutely wasn't perfect in any way.
It's actually even hard to understand how he made it into the Hall of Faith. I'm not being mean. It is somewhat difficult to understand how he made it into the Hall of Faith. They are real people. So I think that's one of the things I do love, not just about the Hall of Faith, but just the Bible in general. But yeah.
So we're getting to Samson. What verse is Samson in?
It's Judges. 11? Hebrews 11, verse 32. It's the list of people. It says, How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets.
Yeah.
And it says by faith, hang on real quick. By faith, these people, I just like this part. So that's why I want to. It says, by faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weaknesses, oh man, that's good stuff. Their weaknesses was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. And then it kind of goes on from there. So talks a little bit about, and it kind of keeps going, but those are the high points on these folks that we're talking about.
So we're going to look at Samson, and Robert, Samson was a pretty tough man, but his father, Samsonite, was a real hard case.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe you just did that. I was wondering where you were going. I
Oh
was
man.
I was absolutely, when you said Samson was a really tough man, my red flag, the warnings just went off and I was like, where is he going with this? Yeah, all right. Well
Julie
played.
says that I get a look in my eye when I'm taking us somewhere. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
I may have seen that.
I don't know that I can disguise the look or
Oh
not
my
because I'm so
gosh.
excited about it. Anyway,
No, it's good. Now, did you think of that on your own, or you just found something that you thought was
I heard it
hilarious?
before, so I had to look it up so I could say it the right way.
That was
But
funny. All
yep,
right,
yep.
yeah. So Samson, a pretty tough man. Yeah,
We see a story in Judges 13.
yeah. I had to
Judges
go on mute.
13. So in Judges 13, we
I
see
can't.
that his mom, um, he what was there was a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan, which is one of the Israelite tribes, in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children, so she's considered barren. Then the angel of the Lord appears to his wife, to Manoah's wife, and says, "Even though you've been able to you've been unable to have children, um, you will soon become pregnant to give birth, and so be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant to give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. Now, a couple
Yeah, it's
things
interesting.
just with this. First
Yep.
of all, the Nazarite creed or the Nazarite
Val.
vow is found elsewhere in Scripture, but basically is not eating certain foods and dressing a certain way and keeping your hair uncut. And so he's just saying, he's affirming, hey, be sure of these things. However, the other thing I would say is that Robert, don't you think that there's a call on our heart as parents that maybe we don't always hear, that when God blesses us with children, that we need to acknowledge that God desires us to raise them in a certain way as well?
Yeah. No, I think so. And in this case,
Maybe not as a Nazarite, but they're
yeah.
still a gift from God who have a purpose and he has a plan for them.
Well, for sure. And in this case, he had this moment where he was chosen. And it does say, he sets us apart and, he knows us in our mother's womb, etc. In this case, he was chosen by the Lord and he was set apart. He was set apart because he said, hey, your son's going to be a Nazirite. Now, it's weird because when you look at the rest of Samson's life, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see how God picked him and chose him and the rest. And I think, I don't know, man, sometimes, you mentioned your own kids. And so, you have kids and I have some, and most of them are really good, but there's occasionally where I'm like, where did you come from? Like, what, I never taught you that. Like, that's not something that you learned from me.
Right. Well, and obviously our job is just to raise them in a certain way, but they're still going to get to a place where they make decisions based on what God's
and I guess
what's going on in their life.
And I guess my point is in those moments, I think the part two of that, and I'm learning now, and I'm not whole yet. I guess you could say I'm learning now that part of it is, I didn't teach them that way, but God has a plan for them. God has a purpose for them. And to your point, it's my job to kind of like keep them in between the boundaries as they move down that way, or in between the rails as they move down that way. So
I guess the thing that I'm pointing out is that, like, I think there should be a level of intentionality, like spiritual intentionality. I have parents ask me from time to time, like, should I make my kids go to church or should I? And I get the question. They're like, I don't want to force it on them. I want them to be able to choose. And I was like, hey, here's another way to think about it. Like, do you make them eat certain foods? Now, nowadays, the answer is sometimes no. We just let them eat whatever they want, which is not healthy for them either. But then
that's a good point, though. Not healthy for them.
Right.
Continue.
It's not healthy for them, right? And Robert, to your point, like, Yeah, you could just let them choose what they want to choose, but spiritually, that's unhealthy for them. Really, if you want to set them up for success, if you truly believe that God has a plan for them and his plan is better than any human plan, and that his way is the way to life, if you really, I believe, out of love, you should bring them to church with you. And it's not see it as forcing him on them, but more or less surrounding them with him so that they can get to a place to see his goodness and his greatness for themselves. So I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think it's really just the bias that we've heard so much of our life is forcing it on them. I don't think it's forcing. I think that you put them in an environment where they can experience his goodness for himself, and you do it regularly so that they become aware of his good, where he is, around them all the time in his blessing. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's not really the point of this story, but
No,
I
but I think
just
there's some
something that
things that we
jumped
should,
out.
there's
Yeah.
some things we should just do as a family. And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
one of them.
and I guess this is just another point to just as you read scripture, like obviously that's not the point to the story, but God can
Yeah.
still speak through these parts to our own hearts. I mean, that's what way he does for me. I see this and I feel like God's going, hey, the way you raise your sons matter to me. So are you listening to me? Are you asking me how I want you to raise them? Are you asking me how you want me to
Yeah.
step into their lives? And
And
so that,
so let's go into verse 8 here. Let's get
yeah,
back on it
yeah,
because I think this is speaking to your point. It says, Manoah prayed to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent come to us again, or come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born. And I'm willing to bet that Manoah, when he heard the boy will be a Nazirite from the womb, and then it says that he will begin to essentially free deliver the Israel from the hands of the Philistines.
yeah,
Um, he's probably like, okay, well, I mean, if that's it, like, what am I supposed to do? What's my responsibility as the parent? How do I bring him up? And so God heard him,
yeah,
and I love this. He shows back up. God sends the angel of God, goes back to his wife while she's out in the field. And, but again, Manoah's not with them. So the wife says, hey, he's here, the man who appeared to me the other day. So they bring him out there. She's, are you the man? Blah, blah, blah. Gets down. And I love this. Manoah says, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work? And the angel of the Lord answered, your wife must do all that I've told her. Basically,
I already told you.
like,
Listen
done
to
told you.
her.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the message. Like, that was his thing. Like, I've already told you, and now you've heard it from me. Go do
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
so I think sometimes God tells us some things, and we're like, so exactly what do you want me to do? Like, yep, told you it's in the Bible. Go ahead, knock yourself out. Told you were listening to the Transformational podcast. Go do that. Told you you were in a sermon, you were convicted, you heard me. Still
yeah,
need you to go do that.
yeah,
And so I just think that's an interesting moment there in the passage.
yeah. So yeah, it's a request and a response that's required. Um, well, it's not required. He responded, but then he tells them, "Hey, I want you to respond to what I'm calling you to do." And so he's born, right?
Yep.
And the Lord blessed him as he grew, um, and began to stir in him while he lived in Manhan, Mahanadan, which is located between the towns of Zorah and Extaol. Extaol. There we go. I didn't pre-read them this time. Sorry.
No, that's
But
fine. I
one of
wasn't
the
trying to help.
things, yeah, I noticed. Thank you. So as he grows, one of the things that is part of the Nazirite deal is that he would not marry outside of the Israelites, partly because it was not a race thing, it was a religion thing. The
Yep.
Philistines specifically worshipped Satan, more or less, false gods, but Satan at its core is what they worshipped and what they served. And so, what does he do? He grows up and he marries a Philistine woman.
He doesn't
And
listen. And the
yeah,
reason why, right? The reason why God didn't want him marrying a Philistine woman. And honestly, that was the whole purpose that God said, hey, when you move into the land, I'm going to push out the people that are live there. And I want you to slaughter anybody who's basically, I want you to kill anybody who's left behind. I don't want you intermarrying with them because these people worship Satan. And if you want to know what they did, go read in Leviticus what God forbids the Israelites to do. And there's some pretty graphic things there. And you're like,
Yeah.
that's disgusting. What in the world? Like, why is that even there? And it finishes that chapter, Chris,
Yeah.
with because this is what the people in that land did.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why. It's because this is what the people in that land did. And he goes, I don't want you intermarrying these people because I don't want you doing that stuff.
Yeah.
I know if you do intermarry, you will do this stuff. And so, yeah, that's kind of the purpose. But does he listen?
No, he
Nope.
doesn't. He actually tells his parents, say, why do you need to marry her? Can't you find someone in our own land, a fellow Israelite you could marry? And Samson told his father, get her for me. She looks good to me. And so,
and it was a part of God's plan, right? That's the thing.
It was
is
still
that,
part of God's plan. Yeah, he was still
God
going to use
was
it.
using it to confront the Philistines, and that's why I wonder with Samson at this point in his life if he knew what his calling was.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it doesn't say whether his parents talked to him about it or not.
But I wonder because God set him apart to basically begin to free the nation of Israel from the Philistines.
Yeah.
And instead of being about that business, he's trying to marry him.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and God's like, all right, we're going to use this to pick a fight.
Yes, so maybe he doesn't, but no. But anyway, verse 5, as they're going to Timnah, which is where the Philistine woman was, a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At the moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. He did it as easily as if it were a young goat, but he didn't tell his father and mother about it. When Samson arrived at Timnah, he talked with the woman and was very pleased with her. Later, he returned to Timnah for the wedding. He turned off the path to look for the carcass of the lion and found the swarms of bees made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some with his hand and into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, but he didn't tell them he'd taken it from the carcass of a lion. Now, this was part of one of the things that he violated. He wasn't supposed to touch dead animals.
Dude, so much about this. Yeah, I mean, he is absolutely... So it's funny because we don't read it. We read it through, I guess you could say, modern day eyes.
Right.
We don't see this as what's really going on. Right now, Samson is going off the rails.
Yes.
He is going off the rails. He's marrying somebody he shouldn't be marrying because of their religion that is about worshiping Satan. And they have this entire, I want to say law. It's called Leviticus. They've already been given it. And it's what sets them apart as clean versus unclean. And it's about what's sacred and not sacred. And so what does Samson do? Violates that. Not only did he kill it, which is, okay, so he saved himself. He came back and he ate honey out of a dead animal. I mean, like, there's so many things that are going, or are not, or I should say, are in violation of what God is kind of, I guess you could say, giving him direction to do. Right. Now, I do find it interesting. I've never personally torn a young goat apart.
No, that was
but the
funny.
way they,
it's like as easily as a young goat.
Like, we know what that is.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's, I don't know. To me, that sounds hard. But now it says he basically did the same thing to a lion. So, and it says the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Mm-hmm. I guess it didn't matter that he was not necessarily walking step in step, stride for stride with the Lord. And I say that, Chris, partly because I think sometimes we think we have to get our act together, or sometimes we think we get so focused on like the rules side of the house as opposed to the grace side of the house, the legalistic side of the house. Like, oh, I can't, I don't want to go before the Lord until I get cleaned up. I don't want to go do what God tells me to do because I got all this baggage, and I don't want to this until I can do that, and blah, blah, blah. That's not necessarily why God uses you. He's using you to his own purpose, to his own end. Be willing, I guess, is our thing.
His divine purpose is greater than your personal failings. I mean, when it comes down to it, is that God's not saying, "Hey, when you get to a certain level, then I can use you." He's saying, "If you'll just be available,
Yeah,
I
and
can
just
use
like
you."
Paul said, it's not a. And Paul says up in Galatians, it's not a license to sin.
No.
That's not what we're talking about.
Well, and I would also
So
say this: the power of the Lord came on him and caused him to be successful. I think we need to make sure that we are humble enough to recognize sometimes God causes us to be successful in spite of our
I
failings.
know, right?
And I think sometimes we look at our failings or we look at ourselves and our successes. I just ripped this line apart. Who's stronger than me, right? And totally missing the fact that I didn't do it on my own. I didn't have the success. I'm not in this place in business. I didn't have these sales. I didn't if it weren't for God doing this for me because he has a plan and he has a purpose for me, he didn't do it because of me. He did it in spite of me. And I think that that's really probably a healthy place to be, where you begin to recognize that any success that you have is a gift from God. Like God has enabled it. He's put that path in front of you, and his power is not dependent on your obedience.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, now I will say this: obedience positions yourself to experience God's power, which is important because I
more
think
fully even.
yes, more
Yeah,
fully, because we're going to see that in, even though Samson gets to see these amazing things, his life later falls apart because he never got into a place where he was fully obedient and reliant on God. And it's almost like one of those deals of um, a loss of potential,
yeah,
like potential that was never realized. Unrealized potential is the word I was
yeah,
looking for.
for
Because
sure.
you see what God did with them, but what if he'd ever fully submitted to God? What could God have done differently? Now, obviously, God's divine and he's providential and he's overall, and he knew exactly what was going to happen, I believe. But at the same time, I do think he gives us choice, and we have to wrestle with that somewhere in there, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
let's not get into that because that could take us way
well, that
off
could
the rails.
spin. So here's the deal: that he gets married, and the people, the townspeople, basically tell his wife, "Hey, um,
Well, he gets married and then he does a
right,
riddle, and his riddle, he says, "Hey, if I get this riddle correct, then, or if y'all don't guess this riddle in 3 days, you owe me a bunch of money. Basically, it's clothes and some stuff. And if you don't get it, then y'all owe me a bunch of money, which is clothes and some stuff." So anyway,
right."
they end up getting his wife, Samson's wife, to tell them what the riddle is, because nagging. And we're just gonna skip by that, Chris. We're gonna skip by it. We're gonna
That's
keep going.
fine.
We're
We
gonna keep
should.
going.
This is not a
No, it's
message
not a
about
marriage
that.
podcast. Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, uh, because of Samson's wife, they actually learn the riddle, and then Samson gets, he's mad because his wife told him the answer, and so now he has to go get 30 clothes and all this other stuff, and so Samson, to pay his debt, went to a town and killed 30 people to pay his debt,
Yeah.
out of
And once
anger.
again, it says the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, even in the midst of his anger and in the midst of really his acting on impulse. Right,
Yeah.
he goes down and gets this clothing from 30 people. Right,
And then in a fit of rage, he just goes home. He's like, "All
yeah,
right, I'm going home."
and
And doesn't bring his wife. I'm going
yeah,
home,
and his
and that
wife,
matters because his wife gets basically given off to his
yeah.
his best man
It
or his
says best
companion.
man, which I don't even know exactly what that means, because I don't think it's the same as it is for us, because it says that the wife's family gave him 30 young men from the town to be his companions. So it's almost like he was given,
Given friends.
given friends. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So anyway, off to one of his friends, whether he was friends with them or not, and Samson comes back for his wife eventually after he cools down because Samson had a little bit of, I guess you could say, some anger issues at this
yeah, he
point
had
in
some
his
temper.
life. And so he comes back, and the father of the wife says, "Hey, I already gave her away." And so, in a response to that, because again, he is, um, I don't know, he's impulsive, and he wanted his wife that he felt like he married, and as a compromise, they're like, "Here, take the sister," and he's like, "Nah." And so, what does he do? he goes and grabs a bunch of foxes, ties their tails together, because this is normal. First of all, I don't even know how you do this.
Foxes aren't going to just sit there, and they're not like pets. They're not domesticated.
I know.
How did
And
he
then
do
he
this?
like fastens a torch to the pair of, so ties two foxes together, puts a torch in their tails, and he basically catches their crops on fire. Basically, they run through the fields, catching all their crops on fire. And when the Philistines were mad, they're like, "Hey, who did this?" He's like, "Yeah, it's me." And Samson at this point is takes, essentially, I want to say, he shirks his duty again. See, he was called to begin. I think that's the most important piece of this. He was called to begin the liberation of Israel, and what he does is he sets their fields on fire and he goes and hides in a cave.
Yeah.
Like that's what he's doing. And so you're kind of like, Samson, what are you doing, man? Like, God has empowered you to do more. He has given you, he comes mightily on you to do more. You can see that with God's power, his spirit, you can do more. And he, in a fit of rage, catches a field on fire and goes to a cave.
Yeah.
It's like, like you said, unfilled potential or unmet potential there. And so the story kind of goes on where Philistines essentially go to Judah and they're like, "Hey, we're going to attack Judah." And Judah, in verse 10, the people of Judah ask, "Why have you come to fight us?" And the Philistines say, "We have come to take Samson prisoner, to do to him as he did to us." And 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Edom and said to Samson, "Don't you realize the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" Which is interesting, right? 3,000 men to go get Samson.
One man. Yes.
Yeah, one man. And oh, by the way,
the original Jason Bourne.
Yeah, I know. The Philistines didn't go get him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were like, "Yeah, well, we haven't had a good go of it. Could you go grab him for us?"
Yeah.
So anyway, they said sure, and he says, "Don't kill me. I'll let you tie me up." So the Judeans.
Yeah.
You like what I did there? I took Judah and I turned it into Judeans.
You did well.
I thought that was, yeah. Anyway, in verse 13, they agreed, "We will only tie you up, hand him over to him. We won't kill you." So they bound him with brand new ropes. And I think that data point, that note right there in the scripture, 2 new ropes, is to help everybody realize these aren't old crusty ropes. These are ropes that should have held. So as they approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him and shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. This is Samson. And the ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. And so basically these ropes literally just kind of fell off with his ginormous muscles.
Yeah.
I just see him in, like, he's like all tied up and he just flexes, right? He just flexes, does the whole like Terry Tate chest pop, and the entire ropes just drop to the ground, right? And so he finds the fresh jawbone of a donkey, and he ended up killing 1,000 Philistines with the donkey's jawbone.
Yeah. So he kills them, and when he was finished, it says when he finished his boasting, he gave a little bit of another poem, if you will. He threw away the jawbone, and the place was named Jawbone Hill. But then verse 18, I found this interesting. It says, Samson was now very thirsty, and he cried out to the Lord, "Have you accomplished this great victory by the strength of your servant? Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of these pagans?" So God caused water to gush out of a hollow in the ground at Lehi, and Samson was revived as he drank. Anyway, I found that interesting that he still, in his mind, God used his strength to do it. He didn't realize that he was using God's strength. That God's strength was the one who was giving him, which I think it's telling because of that pride always comes before fall. That when you begin to take credit for what God has done, it will never actually turn out well for you. So goes on and says that one day he went to the Philistine town of Gaza.
Real quick, on the verse 20, the one right before that.
Yeah.
I thought it's a verse that I don't think I've ever seen. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So after this great victory, he is essentially leading the house of Israel, or the people of Israel, judging is what it says, for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Because it skips forward to this went to Gaza, I do wonder what that really means.
Yeah.
When it says he judged him, because you have this period of Samson's life where it seems to be wasted potential. You have this where it says he judged for 20. Chris, and
Is that you or me?
no, it's you, man.
No, it's not me.
It's not me. No, it's
Hold
totally
on. I know
you.
what it is. Be right back.
Oh my goodness. Chris is taking a step off because I think, different than no, he put his phone somewhere on his table where he can't find it, and he was ringing. So while he's getting back, I'm going to monologue, and we're going to make fun of him when he gets back about all the funny things we said about him while he wasn't actually on.
So here's the deal. We have a charging station for all the family's phones on my desk now. I was like, but they don't normally have them on there during the day, so I don't know why they're on there. Maybe they get in trouble. So I don't know.
No, it's funny.
Anyway,
no, we said a lot of funny things about you while you're gone.
So you were making the point about he judged Israel because that's actually how the Lord led Israel during those years. But anyway.
Yeah, so he has this wasted potential before judging Israel. It says he judged for 20 years, and then we skip to this next verse, which is he went to go see a prostitute. And I'm just like, what happened in the 20 years? It feels like it's missing a part.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't tell us, and I don't think it tells us. It doesn't tell us because it's not part of the important part of the story. So, but it is. Those are the types of things that always make me want to kind of like pick and look a little more in depth.
Well, so I think it's a little picture of God allowed him to be in a place of leadership, but then you see the deterioration and the downfall really starting with this prostitute. I had someone ask the other day, like, how does a pastor like make that decision, talking about a pastor who'd failed miserably in ministry and it was publicized. I said, they don't make that decision one day. There are 100 or 200 or hundreds of little decisions between where they once were and that final step before they make that last decision. It is one little compromise after another. It's one little, it's not the big deal. It's one of those pride and arrogance and compromise, and they all add up. I feel like you see this. He ruled for 20 years, and then it's like, but here's basically
what was going on.
A little picture of the downfall that was to come.
Yeah. So you want to go into it?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll probably have to speed up a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, no, we got stuck a little bit. I think we can skip this part, honestly, because really the point of this one is he goes to this town. He ends up sleeping with a prostitute. That's not a point of it. The point is the Philistines are like, hey, we got him right where we want him. We're going to catch him. And Samson, because he is awesome, basically takes their gates off of their hinges, which are, the gates aren't anything small. And he takes them to the top of the hill. Almost just to mock them.
Yeah, well, and it also, gates were like important for security for these towns. So he ripped off their security. Without gates, enemies could easily invade, and so the fact that he picked them up and took them away, not only did he free himself, he left them vulnerable as he did.
And the scripture is trying to highlight, or at least really articulate very clearly how strong Samson is at this point.
Yeah.
And is a strength that it defies comprehension. And that's important because enter Delilah.
Delilah.
Yeah. And so Delilah is a woman that he ended up falling in love with. The Philistine rulers went to her and said, hey, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength. So they think for sure he's got some sort of like talisman or something up his sleeve that's making him strong. And so what does Delilah do? And this is where Samson is weak, right? He's weak in women nagging him.
Yeah, he said, please tell me what makes you so strong. And he says, well, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that had not yet been tried, I'd become as weak as anyone. So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings. She tied him up with them. She'd hidden some men in one of her inner rooms. And she cried out, Samson, they're here to get you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings and as if they were burned by fire. And obviously his strength was not discovered. So it happens again. She's like, "You've been making fun of me, telling me lies. Now tell me
Yep.
how."
Does it with new ropes.
Right. New
Same
rope,
thing.
same thing happens. Then she says,
Tries
"You've been
again this
making fun of
time.
me."
Puts
Right.
his braids into a loom, like a weaver's
His hair.
loom.
Yeah.
The hair of his head into a weaver's loom. Same thing happens. Samson's essentially still mocking him.
Yep.
But then he what?
Then finally, after she tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. That's
Sounds
the verse. That
familiar.
is
He
verse 16.
nags. Yeah,
It says, "Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut." He confessed, "For I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth, and my head was shaved, my strength would leave, and I would become as weak as anyone else." Now, I've seen people walk through the vow of the Nazirite, and this was literally the last straw, the one thing that he had not violated
yeah.
in his life, or that was seen to be violated. And so Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth, so he sent for the Philistine rulers, "Come one more time." And this time, when they bust in, he can't do anything. He can't shake free. It says, but he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So he was captured. They gouged out his eyes, took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. But it says, before long, his hair began to grow back. I find that interesting because he was taken from his place and then put in a place where he has now to grind grain. They would push a grinding wheel in circles, and it took quite a bit of strength. It was a workout. So he's put his strength, his some level of strength was put to use.
Yeah, whatever was left, it was the earthly strength, the non-holy strength, the non-spirit of God strength is now put to use. I think it's funny they didn't shave his head or keep his head shaved. That to me, they let his hair grow back out. That's weird.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah,
I think I would have been like, hey, I don't know if it comes with a hair, not hair. Let's just keep that guy shaved.
Yeah.
I'm just
We've
saying.
never had good luck when his hair was past his ears. So let's just keep
that guy shaved. Let's make him look like a Marine.
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
So
Anyway.
the Philistine rulers had a great festival, offering sacrifices and praising their false god Dagon.
Again, Satan. This is why Samson wasn't allowed to be hanging out with the Philistines.
Which, by the way, I think is interesting when people start openly. Well, let me finish. It says, "Our God has given us victory over our enemy Samson." I think anytime people begin being very blatant against God and his people, they set themselves up to be judged by God,
to be defeated,
people, right? And so when the people saw, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered us over our enemy. The one who killed so many is now in our power." And it says, half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring Samson out so he can amuse us." So they brought him out from the prison to amuse them, and had him stand between the pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the young servant who was leaning by the hand, "Place my hands on the pillars that hold up the temple. I want to rest against them." Now the temple was completely filled with people. All the Philistine rulers were there, and there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof who were watching as Samson amused them. Then
First of all, that must have been an impressive structure to not just keep the people there, but keep 3,000 people above them. This isn't like modern day engineering.
Yeah.
Like that must have been incredible.
For sure.
How he got there, I find always pretty interesting. You mentioned it earlier when you talked about one decision at a time with Delilah. He's like, he's playing with fire. Mm-hmm. He's playing with fire. And Proverbs talks about how if you end up essentially cheating on some other man's wife, you're scooping coals into your lap, hot coals into your lap, right?
Yeah.
And so he's playing with fire. And finally he ends up getting burned. He loses hair. Now he's here. He's been pulled in. And now his servant, which apparently he didn't hate because he's like, hey, put my hands up here so that I can rest.
So then he prays a prayer that just shows a change of heart in Samson.
Completely different man. Right? Not even the same person we've seen through the entire time even.
It's interesting. I've heard people say you can choose to humble yourself before God, or God will allow you to be humbled or even
Yeah.
humiliated by the decisions you've made and the problems. However, it's not just the point of being humbled, it's the point of being repentant and being and turning back to God that matters, because he turns back to God, says, Sovereign Lord, please, or remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Israelites for the loss of my two eyes. Then Samson put his hands on the two center pillars that held up the temple, pushing against them. With both hands he prayed, let me die with the Philistines. And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. Later, his brothers and other relatives went down to his body. They took him back home where he was buried. Samson had judged Israel for 20 years. It's just so what's the takeaways, Rob? What do we look at Samson? What can we learn from Samson? Like, what does God want us to know? What does God want us to do when we look at his story?
I can't get over with Samson his calling. If you were to ask me, like, I just can't get over his calling. God called him to do something specific. God called him to go and liberate the people of Israel. And when he didn't do it, but he still benefited from the blessing of God. So he's still getting blessed because he's getting the blessing of the strength, but he didn't execute what God called him to do because he had that talent, right? And I think about the times where God's given me talent of something, maybe I'm good at something and I'm like, I'm not going to, and he's calling me to use it for something. I'm like, I'm not going to use it for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so God gave him calling. He gave him a talent. Samson chose not to see that as a gift from the Lord. He chose that to see that eventually he chose to see that as a source of pride. And frankly, Chris, he squandered it because he spent his time in self-indulgence.
Yeah.
Spent his
It was
time
all about him.
Yeah, looking at himself. And I wonder sometimes, even with myself, and it doesn't happen often, but I look back sometimes and I'm like, all right, am I focusing on me? Like, am I using this gift of whatever it may be? So I do think, for example, the Lord's given me the gift of leadership. Okay. That's beneficial because I'm a Marine and I lead a bunch of people, right? So
it's important. Yeah.
It's helpful, right? And I think that's just something that the God has bestowed upon me. But if I start using that to my own end, or I start thinking for some reason that my ability to lead people is something that is of my own end, I'm just telling you right now, it doesn't normally go well for me.
Yeah, right.
And with the same thing that we see here with Samson, it didn't go well for him. And when he finally came to the finally, and he goes, please God, love this, man. Please God, strengthen me just once more. He knew God humbled him, and he knew that his strength didn't come from his hair. His strength came from God.
Yep.
And so I think God's calling us to say, hey, you have a gift. It may be leadership. It may be 100 other things, frankly. And he's calling you to say, okay, plug in, use that gift for me. Plug in either to the church, to the community, because he doesn't give that to you for it to be your own. He gives it to you to be a part of the family in some form or fashion, to serve him, to do his purpose. And so what could we know? God's given us a gift. He set us apart. What should we do? We should go use it to bring glory to the Lord.
That's right. Yeah. So I love that. I think for me, there's a couple things, just big pillar reminders. God uses imperfect people.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He uses imperfect people. So don't think you have to be perfect to be used by God. He just asking for you to be willing and realize and recognize that he can work even through our weakness. He worked through even Samson's failures. He worked through his weakness. And then also I would say the importance of setting yourself apart. When the last piece of Samson's life that he was set apart by, he finally gave into it. I think that we shouldn't just have one piece. I think we should be saying, God, what does it look like to be set apart in my life? How do I do this differently? What is my life? What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus in this line of work? What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus, to let you lead me in this work so that you can use me in this work? So I think there's something to be said for being set apart, and what does it look like to be set apart for God right where you are. I would talk about the dangers of impulsiveness and lust. It is a big
Yeah,
deal, right?
it
It was
is.
his downfall in many ways. I would say that one of the things that we see here is God's grace in second chances. I mean, he at the end of his life, God didn't say sorry, it's over for you. He gave him, but then also you mentioned this. Samson finally recognized where his real strength came from.
Mm-hmm.
He found, up until this point, he kept believing that his strength was because of himself or because of his hair. His real strength came from God. And I think it's just good for us to remember that our strength comes from God. But then the last thing, Rob, that I would say is Samson was chosen by God, but it didn't keep him from the consequences of disobedience.
Yeah.
Right? Just because you're chosen by God doesn't mean you're untouchable. Doesn't mean that God's going to rescue you from your consequences. He can rescue you through your consequences, but at the same time, it's recognizing that there are earthly consequences for choices to disobey, to do things our own way instead of God's way. Because ultimately, that's what we're choosing. We're choosing our way over God's way,
Yep.
and our way will always be a wreck.
Yeah.
God's way is the only way that will actually work. And so, just recognizing that there are consequences. And so, man, I look at it and I start looking at, why is he in the Hall of Faith? Well, because he had a faith in God's calling on his life. His ultimate act of faith. Really, he was the best actor in Scripture because his final act brought the house down, Robert.
Oh my gosh, again.
But
We start and finish
in
with a dad joke.
reality,
Thank you.
here's the deal. Here's the
Wait,
deal.
go ahead. Go ahead. Bring us home.
I think the thing to come back to, why is he in the Hall of Faith? Not because he was perfect, but because he stepped to God's purpose for his life. He ruled for 20 years. We don't know what he did for those 20 years, but we know he ruled for 20 years, and God used him for that purpose to begin to deliver God's people from Israel. He didn't even see the completion of it. He just recognized, hey, I'm going to step into this. And maybe it wasn't even till the end of his life. Now, he was calling out for vengeance for his two eyes, but he was stepping into it saying, God, you're the one who's given me power before. Will you give me power again in this moment so that you can use me? And I can, my final act will be an act of faith, trusting you.
Yeah. Amen.